A man found a strange white object buried behind his house, but when he opened it, everything changed. Stay till the end to see the shocking truth hidden in the desert. Before we start, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's see who's here first. The Arizona sun had a way of bleaching everything it touched: fences, tires, even bones. After a night of lightning and dust storms, Michael Harper stepped outside to check the damage behind his property. His land stretched far out toward the desert, where the wind sculpted hills of sand that shifted from day to day. But this morning something was different. Near the far edge of his yard, something white glimmered under a thin layer of sand. At first glance, it looked like an old propane tank or maybe a piece of aircraft debris. But the longer Michael stared, the stranger it seemed. The object's surface wasn't smooth like metal. It was scarred, covered in long black streaks that looked like burn marks. He climbed over the fence and started walking toward it. Each step made the sand crunch beneath his boots. The closer he got, the more details came into focus. Frayed ropes hung from its sides, torn and charred, as though someone had tried to drag it here and given up halfway. The object was massive, about the size of a small car, and its surface shimmered faintly in the sunlight. Michael's first thought was that it might be some kind of weather balloon or even space debris. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, strange things sometimes fell from the sky. The government had test ranges scattered across the desert, and stories of secret crashes weren't rare. He crouched down and brushed his hand across the metal. It was cool, colder than it should have been under the morning sun. That made him pause. Then, from inside the object, he heard something. It was faint at first, a dull metallic thump, like a tool dropping in a hollow drum. Michael straightened up, his pulse quickening. The wind had died down completely. There was only silence now, the kind of silence that felt heavy, unnatural. Then the sound came again, this time clearer. A scrape, a shuffle. Michael's stomach tightened. Something, or someone, was inside. He hesitated, eyes darting across the curved surface, searching for any kind of marking. There were no numbers, no insignia, no warning labels, just the burn marks and dust. He tried to convince himself it was an animal, maybe a coyote that had gotten trapped somehow. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Taking a step closer, he placed his palm against the metal and knocked twice. For a second, nothing. Then a voice whispered from inside. "Help me." Michael stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance. The voice was weak, trembling, human. He swallowed hard, scanning the object's base until he noticed a square outline half buried in the sand. A door. He fell to his knees, digging at the sand with his hands until his fingers hit a corroded metal latch. It was locked with a heavy rusted padlock, half fused with the frame. "Hang on," he shouted, though his own voice cracked from the heat. "I'm gonna get you out." No answer came, only silence, the kind that made his skin crawl. Michael grabbed the lock with both hands and pulled, but it didn't move. He yanked harder, gritting his teeth, until the sharp edge tore into his palm. He hissed in pain, but didn't stop. Somewhere inside, someone was still alive. He glanced back toward his house, but it was too far, and he wasn't about to waste time fetching tools. He pressed his foot against the side of the hatch and pulled again, using every ounce of strength he had. The lock groaned and bent slightly, but didn't give. Then, through the quiet air, he heard another sound. A soft cough. That was enough. Adrenaline surged through him. He took a deep breath, twisted the lock one more time, and felt something snap. A loud crack echoed through the desert as the rusted shackle gave way. The door creaked open an inch, releasing a wave of hot, foul air. Michael staggered back, coughing. The stench was thick, oil, sweat, and something like burnt rubber. He pulled his t-shirt over his nose and leaned closer. The darkness inside was almost total, but his eyes adjusted enough to make out movement. A man. He was sprawled on the floor, his face red and peeling from the heat. His lips were dry, cracked, barely moving. He blinked weakly at Michael, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Please," the man whispered. "Don't let it close again." Michael froze, heart pounding. The man was alive, barely. His body looked drenched in sweat, his shirt stained with grease and dust. Michael reached out a trembling hand. "I've got you," he said, pulling the door open wider. The metal hinges screamed in protest, sending flakes of rust falling into the sand. The man tried to crawl forward, but his limbs shook violently. Michael reached in and grabbed his arm. The skin felt hot, feverish. With a grunt he pulled, dragging the man toward the light. The body was heavier than expected, all dead weight. The man gasped as fresh air hit his lungs for the first time in what must have been days. When they both collapsed onto the sand, Michael could feel the heat radiating off the man's skin. "Who did this to you?" he asked, panting. The man's eyes fluttered. Not a ship," he muttered. "They left me." "Who?" Michael asked. But the man didn't answer. His eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. Michael's hand shook as he grabbed his phone and dialed 911. His voice trembled as he explained to the operator that he had found someone trapped inside a metal capsule in the desert behind his house. Within minutes, the faint wail of sirens began to echo in the distance. Michael sat beside the unconscious man, staring at the strange white object glinting in the sun. He didn't know what it was or how it got there, but one thing was certain. Whatever this thing was, it hadn't been meant to be found. And somewhere, deep in the dry wind of the desert, Michael felt as though someone, or something, was still watching him. The sirens came thin at first, a red thread pulled across the sky, and then louder, rolling over the scrub and washboard roads until the sound filled the whole desert. Michael stayed crouched beside the man, the white shell of the object at his back like a mute moon. Heat poured off the metal and the sand in slow, breathless waves. "Stay with me," Michael said, not sure if the man could hear him. "Help is coming." The man's eyelids fluttered. His lips moved once, twice, making no sound. Michael slid one hand under his neck, the other across his shoulders, and eased him into the narrow band of shade thrown by the capsule. The man's skin felt like a stovetop. Every touch made Michael wince. He pulled his t-shirt over his hand and used the cotton as a barrier so he wouldn't burn either of them. He glanced at the capsule's open hatch. The black interior gaped like a throat, panting still with leftover heat. Inside, condensation had dried into chalky arcs, straps dangled from rivets like wilted vines. He fought the urge to slam the door shut, as if the darkness might inhale him too. Another sweep of the sirens, closer now. Michael looked toward the property gate. Dust ghosted up from the dirt road in a long, trembling line. "Water," the man rasped suddenly, the word barely there, more feeling than voice. Michael fumbled for the small sports bottle clipped to his belt, the only water he'd brought for a quick morning check. He unscrewed the cap with his teeth and pressed the opening to the man's lower lip. "Small sips," he said. "Easy." The first try failed. The man's mouth trembled, and a silver line ran down his chin. Michael steadied the bottle and his hand together, the two of them a single, awkward machine. The man swallowed once, then again. Michael pulled the bottle away before instinct could drive gulping. He'd seen enough survival shows to know how easily a parched throat could rebel. "You're okay," Michael said. "You're out. You're okay." He repeated it because saying it made the shape of the moment feel less impossible. He tore off the bottom hem of his t-shirt, poured a ribbon of water across it, and pressed the damp cloth to the man's forehead, then the side of his neck, where the pulse thudded hard against the skin. Heat rolled off him like a furnace door left open. Gravel crackled. A county sheriff SUV skidded to a stop at the fence line, dust curling around it like smoke. An ambulance followed, white and boxy, lights cutting the air in red-blue pulses that painted the capsule's skin. 2 EMTs jumped out, one tall with a sun-creased face, one compact and fast, already slinging a bag over her shoulder. "Back here!" Michael shouted. He raised both arms and waved them overhead until the EMTs locked on and vaulted the fence. They were on the man in seconds, hands practiced, voices quiet, everything sudden and calm. The woman knelt on the sand and measured a pulse, while the tall EMT slid a fingertip oximeter onto the man's index finger. The monitor's numbers blinked to life like a verdict. "How long was he in there?" she asked without looking up. "I don't know. I found him maybe 10 minutes ago. The hatch was locked. It was so hot." "Any fluids?" "Small sips. He asked for water." "Good," she said. "We'll take it from here." She tore open a cold pack, snapped it with a twist until it went fog white, and tucked it under the man's armpit. Another cold pack slid behind his neck. The tall EMT unspooled tubing and settled a nasal cannula beneath the man's nostrils. The man flinched once, then settled, his chest working in careful, shallow waves. A deputy jogged up, a sweat-dark ring spreading beneath his vest. He stopped dead when he saw the object. His hand went to the brim of his hat, lifting it a fraction, the way people do when they see something they don't have a drawer for in their minds. "What in God's?" he started, then shook his head and focused. "You the caller?" "Yes," Michael said. "Michael Harper, backlot." "I..." He looked at the open hatch and swallowed. "I heard someone inside." "You did good calling it in." The deputy's eyes traveled the curve of the white shell, the scorched ropes, the burned streaks like comet tails. He set his jaw and keyed his radio. "Dispatch, be advised we've got a male with heat illness and an object. Unknown make. Requesting additional units for perimeter." "Copy," crackled the radio. A jeep from the volunteer fire department rattled in and parked beside the ambulance. The EMTs worked like a duet pulse, blood pressure, a measured trickle of IV fluid, another cold pack. The compact one looked up at Michael. "He's overheated, dehydrated, disoriented, but his vitals are responding. You got him out just in time." Michael exhaled hard, as if someone had just cut a strap across his chest. He said, "Don't let it close again." She nodded once, not asking why. She'd heard stranger sentences on stranger days. "We're going to move him." They lifted him onto a narrow board and then to a stretcher in a practiced, careful slide. The man's hand found Michael's wrist and closed, weak but deliberate. His eyes, washed out blue beneath lids swollen with heat, fixed on Michael as if focusing through long water. His lips shaped a word that might have been thanks, or might have been a memory, or a name. "I'm right here," Michael said. He didn't pull free until the EMT guided his hand away and tucked the man's arm under a strap. Behind them, a second patrol car rolled in. The deputy guided the driver away from the capsule, drawing an invisible line that nobody should cross. "We're going to need shade up here," he called. "And tape, lots of it." The EMT swung the stretcher toward the ambulance. "He needs cooling and fluids. We'll stabilize and transport." She paused, looked back at Michael. "You riding along?" Michael glanced at the white hull, at the hatch still yawning open like a secret half-told. For a heartbeat, he imagined the darkness pulling at the heat again, reloading itself, waiting. The idea of leaving it alone, even with deputies pacing nearby, made something in him bristle. But the man on the stretcher had reached for him, as if the world might come apart without that touch. "Yes," Michael said. "If I can." "Front seat," she said, and the decision moved forward like a current. Before he climbed in, Michael jogged to the capsule and wedged the hatch wider with a scrap of timber so it couldn't swing shut. He didn't know why. Superstition, maybe, or a sense that letting the dark fold itself closed would be a kind of betrayal. He coughed once as a final wave of heat breathed out around him. Then he backed away and ran for the ambulance. Inside, the cool air licked his sunburned arms. The tall EMT clipped the stretcher into place. The compact one checked the IV. She looked up at Michael and gave him a quick, workmanlike nod. The kind of thanks people who do hard jobs give to someone who did the most important thing. The first thing. The doors slammed. The siren lifted. The world outside became a strobing sequence of red earth, mesquite, sky. Michael kept his eyes on the man's face, on the lines of salt that sweat had dried across his temple, on the tiny twitch in his jaw when a bump jostled the stretcher. "Can you tell me your name?" the EMT asked the man. A breath, a flicker, a word scraped out like a match across sand. "Sam." "Okay, Sam," she said. "You're headed to Desert Mercy. You're safe." Sam blinked slow, as if the syllables themselves were cool water. His fingers lifted and fell against the sheet. Michael found himself counting those taps, not numbers so much as proof that time still moved and the world still held. The EMT glanced at Michael. "How'd you know he was in there?" "I heard a voice," Michael said. He replayed it in his mind, the syllables frail and young, incongruous in that metal darkness. He said, "Help me." The EMT's mouth tightened. "Some people go quiet before they go. He must have been fighting." Michael nodded. The image of the hatch flickered again, the way the lock had refused and then cracked with that single gunshot snap. He felt the bite of torn skin across his palm and realized his hand was bleeding, the cut gravel-studded. He looked down, absurdly embarrassed by the mess of it, and then up again at Sam. They sped through the hard, bright miles. At the emergency bay, the doors opened like a stage set, and the stretcher slid into fluorescent light. Scrubs moved, voices overlapped. Heat stroke protocol. Core temp. Get labs. Start cooling blankets. The ambulance's urgent choreography dissolved into a hospital's broader dance. A nurse in purple scrubs guided Michael aside with a card reader clipped to her belt and a pen behind her ear. She gave him a form on a plastic board and asked him for the basics. Name, phone number, what happened. He answered what he could, this and not that, short true things that fit into boxes. When he was done, he found a sink, ran water over his cut palm, and watched the red filaments spin down the drain and away. He wrapped the hand in gauze from a dispenser and sat in a chair whose vinyl sighed beneath him. The ER's air smelled like antiseptic and coffee. The clock on the wall ticked with a stubborn, practical heartbeat. Some minutes later, he couldn't have said how many, the compact EMT appeared again, her bag slung low, tired lines now visible under the edges of competence. "He's responding," she said. "Temperature's coming down. He's a tough one." Michael let himself breathe. "Thank you." She tipped her chin toward his bandaged hand. "You too." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming on everyone's faces since she'd run a palm along the curve of that silent white thing. "What is that out there?" "I don't know," Michael said, and he meant it. "I just heard him." She studied him a second longer, and then nodded, the way people nod when a mystery doesn't belong to them. "They'll page you if they need more." When she left, Michael drifted to the window. Out there, beyond the parking lot, and the far gas station with its flickering price sign, the desert lay sprawled under a noon sun, hard and bright and indifferent. Between here and the house, deputies would be stringing tape, radios would be popping, and the white capsule would be soaking the heat into its skin as if nothing had happened. He pictured his yard as it had been for years. Mesquite, a wind-battered shed, a fence that kept out nothing more serious than javelinas. Pictured it now with a new orbiting body inside it, gravity bent by something he didn't have words for yet. A nurse called his name. "Mr. Harper," he turned. "They've stabilized him. He's asking for the man who found him." Michael's mouth went dry. He followed her down a hallway that smelled like bleach and hope, his boots squeaking slightly on the polished floor. In a curtained room, Sam lay with a gray cooling blanket draped across his chest, lines snaking to machines that hummed a steady, caretaking music. Color had crept back into his face. His eyes were less glass and more earth. Michael stopped just shy of the bed. "Hey." Sam's mouth curved at the corner. "You opened it," he whispered, voice rough but thick enough now to carry. "Thought that was it." Michael forced a smile that didn't feel forced at all. "Me too, for a second." Sam blinked up at the ceiling. When he spoke again, the words came slow and measured, as if each had to cross a field of heat to reach the air. Door jammed, heard it click. Couldn't get it to go. Kept thinking someone would come. Then it got so hot, like the air itself was gone. Michael swallowed. He could still feel the blast that had hit him when the hatch opened, like sticking his face into an oven. He could still hear the lock breaking, the sound cave sudden and final. "You're out now." Sam turned his head, the movement small but deliberate. His gaze landed on Michael's bandaged hand and stayed. "You cut yourself," he said, faint amusement ghosting the rasp. "Should have brought a bolt cutter." "Next time," Michael said, and they both let the joke sit long enough to be real. Footsteps rustled outside the curtain. A doctor stepped in, introduced herself, did the check's pupil light, palm squeeze, a few oriented to time and place questions that Sam passed with halting but steady answers. When she left, she told Michael he could stay a little longer, and told Sam to rest. "Thanks," Sam said, and this time the word had weight. He licked his lips, eyes narrowing as if focusing. "It would have closed," he said, softer. "If you hadn't wedged it. It likes to close." Michael felt a shiver run through him, ridiculous and involuntary in the clean, bright room. He nodded. "It's not closing on anyone again today." Sam's eyes drifted shut. The monitor traced a gentle geometry above his head. Michael stood there longer than he needed to, until the nurse slipped in and tilted her head. Time. He stepped into the hallway. The ER seemed to have stretched while he was inside. It always did. New faces, new crises, the same relentless compassion. On his way out, he dialed the deputy's number he'd been handed at the scene. A woman answered, brisk and courteous. "Sheriff's office." "This is Michael Harper," he said. "I'm calling about my property." "We've secured your back lot," she said. "We'll need you to meet with a detective this afternoon to give a statement." "And, Mr. Harper?" A small pause, a crackle of the line. "You might want to stay nearby for a bit. Folks are curious. We'll have a unit posted, but you know how it goes." "I do now," he said. He stepped through the automatic doors. The air outside felt thinner, like the sky had been stretched tight. He stood on the sidewalk a long moment and let the sun find the places on his arms the ambulance AC had cooled. Then he walked to the edge of the lot and stared toward the seam where town gave up and desert took back over. Somewhere out there, his fence traced a line across sand that did not care about lines. Somewhere, that hatch sat open against wood, a black mouth caught mid-word. He thought of the voice he'd heard through the metal, small, steady, almost apologetic. He thought of the way the lock had resisted everything, right up until it didn't. Of the burn streaks like handwriting he couldn't read. He rubbed his thumb along the gauze and felt the sting beneath it, alive and ordinary. Behind him, a teenager pushed a wheelchair toward the sliding doors, a woman in it with a leg in a brace and a paperback novel face down in her lap. A paramedic held the door. The world went on with its million ordinary rescues. Michael turned toward his truck. The engine coughed, caught, settled. He pulled out of the lot and aimed the nose toward home. Not because he wanted to stand near the thing again, but because the place where he found it had become, in a single hour, the place where everything had almost been lost. He would go back and find the gouge his boot had left by the hatch. He would see the claw tracks where he'd dragged a stranger across sand and into air. He would make sure the wedge still held. The road unspooled. Mesquite flicked past the windows like a slow metronome. A hawk hung above a thermal, wings barely moving. Michael drove with his left hand and kept his right palm raised off the wheel, the bandage bright as chalk in the cab's dim. When he reached the turnoff, he could see the cruiser lights before anything else. A flicker of blue tucked into the glare like a heartbeat. 2 deputies stood by the fence with their hats in their hands, speaking to a man in a county windbreaker. Yellow tape blistered in the breeze. As Michael parked, the wind shifted and brought him a whiff of heat and dust and the faint tang of hot metal, as if the object had a smell now, a signature. He cut the engine. For a long breath, he sat in the quiet, listening to the ticking of the hood as it cooled, feeling the day fold around him. Then he stepped out, closed the door, and walked to meet the people who would ask him to tell the story of a voice inside a white shell, and of a lock that opened because it had to, and of a human hand reaching out into the heat for another human hand and finding it. He did not look into the hatch again. Not yet. That would come later. For now, there was only the truth he could say without reaching past the boundaries of the morning. A man was trapped, and we got him out. The rest would wait. Hospitals make time behave. Minutes turn elastic under fluorescent lights, stretching so thin you can see straight through them, then snapping back with a jolt when a door opens and someone says your name. Michael sat in a molded chair with a cup of coffee that tasted like its own brand of fatigue, watching a news channel on mute. A crawl at the bottom of the screen paraded storms, markets, a wildfire 3 counties over. No one had found a way to put a white capsule behind his fence into the ticker. Not yet. A nurse appeared at the doorway to the waiting area and tilted her head. "Mr. Harper, he's awake." Michael followed her through a corridor washed in antiseptic brightness and into a small room with a sliding glass door. Machines glowed quiet blues and greens. On the bed lay the man from the capsule, now cleaner, color returning to a face that had been a heat map of red an hour before. A cooling blanket hummed softly. He looked smaller beneath hospital light, but his eyes had the steadiness of someone who'd walked all the way to the edge and decided not to step. "Hey," Michael said, faltering at the threshold. "It's me, from the yard." The man's mouth lifted at one corner. "Could have sworn you were a firefighter," he whispered. "Or a very determined locksmith." "Name's Michael," he said, easing closer. "Michael Harper." "Sam," the man replied, voice a scrape, but stronger than before. "Sam Riker." The nurse checked vitals, adjusted a clamp, scribbled on a chart, and left with the soft efficiency of someone who had made a practice of letting truths bloom at their own pace. Michael dragged the chair closer. "You kept saying it would close," Michael said. "The hatch." Sam's gaze drifted to the mid-distance, as if the hatch had taken up residence there. "Old Springs," he said. You let it have its way. It'll find it, like a jaw. A silence stretched, not awkward, just wide enough to hold what had almost happened. You saved me, Sam added, the words shaped carefully, like he didn't want to waste any. That isn't the kind of thing you can pay back, but I'm going to try. You can start by telling me what that is, Michael said, more gently than he felt. Everybody's dancing around the question. Sheriff's office marked off half my desert and won't say a thing. What did I pull you out of? Sam watched him for a beat, measuring. You ever been to the Johnson Space Center? He asked. No. They keep old hardware there. Capsules, simulators, things we don't build anymore because we learned what we needed to learn from them. Most of what the world remembers are the pristine museum pieces, the cleaned-up, polished history. What they don't see is the stuff that got used to death before the shiny ones were even ready. He drew a slow breath, testing his own lungs, and went on. That thing out there isn't a spaceship. It's a training capsule, a mock-up. Era of Gemini, give or take, upgraded a dozen times until it was something else entirely. They used it to teach procedures, ingress, egress, emergency drills. You cook in it on purpose. You sweat, and you swear, and you run the script until the script doesn't own you anymore. Michael pictured the scorched ropes, the scarred curves, the straps like wilted vines, the heat that had spilled out like a second sun. How does a training capsule end up half buried behind my house? Sam's throat worked. He took a sip of the water the nurse had left. People call them salvagers, he said. Most are legit. Some aren't. A few months back, I fell in with a crew that bought surplus from government auctions and other places. They'd strip parts, sell metal by the pound, resell choice pieces to collectors who wanted their office to look like a space movie. I'm not proud of it. I know the line between salvage and theft isn't blurry at all, even if some folks pretend it is. You were one of them, Michael said, not accusing, just trying to fit the pieces. I was the guy who could tell what you were looking at, Sam said. I worked tooling and testing for a contractor in my 20s. I know the language old bolts speak. The crew found the capsule in a yard where things go to be forgotten. They shouldn't have had a way to lay hands on it, which is how you know somebody with a badge or a badge-adjacent friend was making side cash. They couldn't move it in daylight without questions, so we brought it out in pieces to your end of nowhere and planned to come back with a winch and a truck after the storm. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. We wedged the hatch with a block while we were checking inside, labeling, photographing, figuring out how to pull it without ripping the skin. Wind kicked up. Sand moved. Somebody bumped the block out. The hatch swung. I was still in there. It kissed shut. Old latch stuck. It does that when it's hot. And they left you, Michael said. Sam's mouth tightened. They thought I'd gotten out, or they didn't think at all. The truck coughed its last on the road. They took the other pickup to go fetch parts, or a mechanic, or guts. I waited. Bang, bang, bang. He looked at his hands, flexed them against invisible steel. The way the sound dies inside something like that, if you've never felt it, you don't want to. Heat climbed, air got thin. It's the kind of quiet that gets inside your head and starts telling stories. Michael felt the echo of that heat in his skin, memory pulling at his breath. 2 days, he asked. Sam nodded. Give or take, I lost count. Might have been 1 long day and a bad dream. Might have been 3. He studied Michael. Then I heard your boots. They let that sit between them. The monitor traced a measured rhythm above Sam's shoulder. I need to tell the sheriff what you told me, Michael said. You should, Sam replied. Tell NASA, too, or the Air Force, someone who cares about old steel for the right reasons. This may be a shell, but it's a story made into metal. It belongs to the people who built it, and to the country that sent men to do ridiculous, beautiful math above the sky. Michael glanced toward the window. The deputies already blocked the road. They'll want your statement. They can have it, Sam said. All of it. Names if you need them. The crew wasn't careful. They bragged. They left trails. Nobody who touches something like that should be surprised when the story reaches back. A knock came. A knuckle, not a fist. A detective in a tan blazer stepped in with a notebook and a badge on a chain. She introduced herself as Detective Mara Ruiz, thanked Michael with the professional warmth of someone who had read the first paragraph and wanted the whole book, and asked if Sam felt up to a few questions. He did. She pulled up a chair. What followed had a cadence Michael recognized from local news interviews and insurance adjuster calls. Direct questions, short facts, no flourishes. Names, dates, makes and models, a rented storage unit off Highway 14, a box truck with a misfiring cylinder, a yard near an old test range where things retired quietly and sometimes too quietly. Sam described the wedge in the hatch, the way sand migrates in a storm, the sound when old metal chooses its own idea of closed. Ruiz wrote in tight blocks. You're saying someone with access to a restricted yard facilitated this, she said. I'm saying a gate was open that shouldn't have been, Sam replied, and that the people who walked through it knew enough to keep their heads down. You'll give me your crew's names? I will, Sam said. I'm done keeping bad company out of trouble. Ruiz's eyes flicked to Michael. And you, Mr. Harper, anything you saw besides what you told the deputy? Just the object, he said. Burn marks, ropes, the lock, the voice. The voice, she echoed. Penn paused. You did good, getting him out. It came out both as praise and as a way of placing a pin on the board. This is where the line bends. We'll be in touch. When she left, the room's noise returned to its hospital baseline. Sam let his head sink back. Some of the hard angles of him had softened. That's what water and air will do when you feed them to a person in the right amounts. Michael stood. You need rest, he said. I'll be around. Sam reached out, caught his wrist with fingers that had been steel on steel hours before and now were human again. One more thing, he said. When this gets noisy, and it will, people will come by your place saying they're with this agency or that museum or some foundation you've never heard of. Most will be real. A few won't. Folks get funny around history you can touch. Thanks for the heads up, Michael said. I mean it, Sam said. They'll ask questions that sound helpful. They'll ask you to sign things that sound harmless. If someone tells you to forget what you saw... He shook his head. That's when you remember harder. Michael squeezed his shoulder and slipped out. The afternoon outside had settled into that blank white heat that turns shadow into currency. At the end of the hospital walkway, a man in a collared shirt he didn't deserve leaned against a rental sedan in the shade of a sad, heroic palm. He straightened when Michael approached. Mr. Harper, the man asked, voice smooth, accent from somewhere large enough to have airports. He flashed something pocket-sized and leather that he put away before Michael could read it. I'd like to talk about what you found on your property. Sheriff's office is handling that, Michael said. Of course, the man replied, easy. His smile had no temperature. We're working with them. I represent a private institution interested in historical preservation. Items like the one on your land are delicate and sometimes misunderstood. We'd like to make sure it's handled correctly. Michael let the silence between them draft its own shape. What institution? The man named a foundation Michael recognized from the kind of magazine that sits unread in airport lounges. He followed it with the words endowment and conservation and continuity. He could have said gravity and weather and destiny, and the tone would have been the same. We'd be happy to take temporary custody, the man said. for safekeeping. In return, of course, we'd compensate you for the inconvenience of having your property occupied." "Occupied," Michael repeated, watching the way the man's eyes didn't quite reach his words. "You'll want to talk to Detective Ruiz." "Absolutely," the man said. "In the meantime, we can make this easier for you. No need for cameras at your fence, or reporters on your lawn, or strangers asking questions at all hours." He reached into his pocket and slid a card across his palm like a dealer. "Just give us a call. We'll handle the logistics. Discretion is a form of kindness, Mr. Harper." Michael took the card because it was easier than letting it fall to the sidewalk. The name on it was careful and tasteful, and possibly invented last Tuesday. He looked up. "I'm going home," he said. "Of course," the man replied, stepping back into the waiter's grace of someone who never had to carry a plate. "Think about what I said." Michael walked past him without a nod. At the edge of the lot, he looked back once. The man stood in the palm's meager shade, head bent as if he were reading something inside his own hands. By the time Michael turned onto his road, the wind had built enough to make the yellow tape hum. Deputies had swapped day shift faces for evening ones. A larger SUV sat by the gate. A woman in a windbreaker marked "Evidence" in small letters, stacked neat boxes on the hood. The white capsule hunched in the sand, the open hatch a dark coin. The wedge he'd shoved there earlier held. A uniform waved him through to the house. Michael parked and stood on his porch long enough to feel the boards collect the day's heat through his boots. He took a breath, then another, then walked the back path. "Mr. Harper," Detective Ruiz called from near the gate, and he angled toward her. She had a new notebook, a new angle to the sun on the brim of her hat. "We've got a team from the State Historical Office en route. NASA's been notified. We'll have a formal chain of custody by morning." "Good," Michael said. He held up the card. "A man found me at the hospital." Ruiz scanned the card, and her mouth ticked in a way that wasn't quite a smile. "I know the type. If he comes back, tell him to call me. He said he could make this easy." "He could," she answered. "For himself." The wind brought a smell like hot coins. Michael glanced at the capsule again. "Sam says it's a training capsule, Gemini era, a mock-up that got used and used until it forgot what it was pretending to be." Ruiz scribbled that down too. "Then it's not trash," she said, "and it's definitely not scrap." As dusk slid down the sky like a curtain, the capsule took on a ghost's glow, its white picking up the last light and holding it. A deputy hung a tarp to shield the hatch. Another walked a perimeter with a clipboard and a patience that could weather a century. Just after the sun broke contact with the horizon, a pickup rolled to a stop at the end of the tape. Two men stayed inside a beat too long. When they climbed out, the taller one wore a ball cap that tried and failed to make him anonymous. "Evening," he called, casual in the way of a man who works hard at sounding like he isn't. "We're with the crew that called this in." "Nobody from your crew called anything in," Ruiz said without raising her voice. "Turn around." The men held for a beat in that animal calculus fight, or shrug or run, then shrugged and folded back into the truck. The taillights smeared red along the sand before the night swallowed them. Michael felt the back of his neck crawl in a way that had nothing to do with mosquitoes. He stayed until the stars came in a few at a time, then all at once. The desert cooled. The metal's smell lost its edge. He gave his name to a pair of feds whose jackets said they were here to help, and whose eyes said they were here to make sure nobody broke anything priceless. He told the same short true story to a woman from the state who talked about conservation, and to a man from the county who talked about liability, and to a deputy who just wanted to make sure Michael had eaten. Back in the house, he stood at the sink and stared out the kitchen window at a rectangle of night barely brighter than the sky. Beyond it, 2 tents of light marked the perimeter like small, patient moons. He washed his hands again, unwrapped the bandage, and found the cut neat and honest across his palm. The skin pulled when he closed his fist. It felt like a promise. His phone vibrated on the counter. Unknown number. He nearly let it die, then thumbed, "Accept." "Mr. Harper," a voice said, radio clear. "You don't know me. Don't need to. You did a good thing today. Do yourself another. Let the right people carry this. Let the wrong ones go home empty-handed." "Who is this?" Michael asked. "Someone who remembers what those tools were for," the voice said. "Someone who hates seeing them turned into decor." A pause. "And someone who knows the men who put that capsule in your yard are not the only ones who'll come calling." The line clicked dead. Michael stared at the screen a long moment. Then he set the phone face down, turned off the kitchen light, and let the dark take its shape around him. The house ticked and settled. Outside, the night moved in its old, unhurried ways. The capsule waited, a hush in metal form, a history pressed into a shape that didn't belong in anyone's backyard. He lay in bed and listened to wind slip a low chord along the eaves. In his mind, the hatch showed itself again, the stubborn lock, the sudden give, the breath of oven air, the word that had survived the heat. Help. He thought of Sam in a room filled with careful machines, of Detective Ruiz with her patient pen, of a man in the shade with a smooth card, of voices that came from numbers you couldn't call back. Between one breath and the next, the thought arrived the way Desert Dawn does. Quiet, inevitable. He hadn't just opened a door. He'd opened a story, and stories don't stay where you put them. Morning would bring more cars, more questions, more hands hovering just close enough to call it interest. Michael closed his eyes, and the last thing he saw was the curve of white under stars, a relic that still radiated its own small heat, and the line it had drawn right through the center of an ordinary life. The morning after the hospital meeting came bright and too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort, just presses down. Michael stood at his kitchen window with a mug that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, staring at the stretch of sand where his property blurred into desert. Beyond the mesquite line, lights still blinked around the capsule. Deputies, tech vans, tripods. The night before, it had looked like an alien landing. In daylight, it looked worse official. A knock sounded at the front door. Not the polite double tap of a neighbor, but the slow, steady rhythm of someone who expected to be obeyed. Michael set the mug down and opened the door. Detective Ruiz stood there, hat off, eyes narrow against the glare. Behind her, a government SUV idled, the tires already half sunk in sand. "Morning, Mr. Harper," she said. "You up for some company?" "I guess I don't have much choice," Michael said. She smiled, thin but not unkind. "Not really." Inside, she flipped open a small notebook and perched at his table. "We've identified the capsule," she said. "NASA confirmed serial fragments. It's an operational mock-up, used for pressure testing and astronaut emergency drills, retired in the early 80s. Supposed to have been destroyed." Michael frowned. "Destroyed how?" "Crushed for scrap at a federal depot," Ruiz said. "But looks like someone skipped that part. We traced shipping records. One piece disappeared in transit 30 years ago. Since then, it's been passed hand to hand. Private collections, unsanctioned auctions. You name it." Michael leaned forward. "So those men Sam mentioned, they were part of something bigger," she said. "We think they've been stealing decommissioned equipment from aerospace storage for years, selling to collectors overseas. We've got reason to believe someone inside NASA or the Air Force has been helping them cover it up." He stared at her. "You're saying this is federal corruption?" Ruiz's pen paused mid-word. I'm saying you stumbled into a supply chain that was never supposed to exist. A hum built in Michael's chest, half fear, half curiosity. He turned toward the window. The white capsule gleamed in the sun, as if it had heard its own name mentioned. "Sam's cooperating?" he asked. "Completely," she said. "He gave us 3 names, 2 locations, and a set of coordinates in Nevada, but that's where things get messy." "Messy how?" "Those coordinates point to a yard owned by a front company that doesn't exist. And the owner, retired colonel, government contracts, same signature on the disposal form for your capsule." Ruiz slid a photo across the table. A man in uniform, handshake, American flag backdrop. The kind of photo that lived in hallways of people who expected to be trusted. Michael stared at it. "You think he's running this operation?" "We think he's selling history by the pound," she said. "And someone up top doesn't want that story out." Outside, an engine roared to life. Ruiz turned, scanning through the blinds. A black SUV had stopped by the outer fence. No plates, windows tinted black. It idled there, humming like a question. "You expecting anyone?" she asked. Michael shook his head. She stood. "Stay inside." By the time she reached the porch, the SUV was already turning. It sped down the dirt road, kicking up a snake of dust that rose and vanished. Ruiz watched it go, her jaw tight. "They're watching," she said when she came back in. "Who?" "Whoever wants this capsule to disappear again." That afternoon, the desert turned restless. Reporters showed up, first drones buzzing overhead, voices asking for interviews through the fence. Then came the government trucks. 2 men from Washington, polished, polite, and already irritated, stepped out flashing credentials with logos Michael didn't recognize. They took photos, measurements, and whispered with Ruiz under the shade of the SUV. Michael stayed on his porch. Every so often one of the men would glance toward him. It wasn't gratitude in their eyes. It was calculation. That night the wind changed. From the east came the smell of oil and burned plastic. When Michael walked the perimeter, he found fresh tire tracks near the back fence, not from any police vehicle, wider, heavier. And half buried in the sand, something glinted. A piece of metal. Small, square, with engraved numbers. He turned it over in his hand. It wasn't from the capsule. It was too new. When he wiped off the sand, he saw it clearly. Property of U.S. Air Logistics Division, restricted access. He pocketed it, uneasy. The next morning, he went to see Sam. The hospital smelled the same. Coffee, antiseptic, tired miracles. Sam looked better. His skin wasn't raw anymore, though his eyes held a deeper exhaustion, the kind that doesn't leave with rest. "They came last night," Michael said quietly. "Government cars, watching the property." Sam nodded slowly. "Then they found out you talked to Ruiz. They'll try to make it disappear clean this time. No headlines, no questions." Michael frowned. "Disappear how?" "They'll classify it," Sam said. "Seal it in paperwork and call it handled, and anyone who found it—" He stopped, gaze sharp now. "They'll call it a misunderstanding, or a lie." Michael felt the weight of that metal tag in his pocket. "There's more going on, isn't there?" Sam hesitated. "Before I got trapped, we opened a side panel. There was a compartment inside, welded shut. Old, but sealed too clean for a training mock-up. That thing wasn't just for practice, Michael. It was used for something else, something no one was supposed to see." Michael leaned in. "You mean secret experiments?" Sam didn't answer right away. "Let's just say it carried something that wasn't supposed to fall into the wrong hands, and now everyone wants to make sure it doesn't." Michael's pulse thudded in his ears. "So what's inside?" Sam looked toward the door, then back. "If I tell you, you'll wish I hadn't." Just promise me one thing. Don't let them take it without someone watching." When Michael left the hospital, the sun was going down. He drove home under an orange sky that looked too peaceful for what was coming. At the turnoff, he slowed. The tape around his property was gone. Every vehicle, every officer, every light gone. The capsule stood alone in the sand, untouched but suddenly vulnerable, like a relic abandoned after the ceremony ended. Michael stepped out of the truck. The air felt heavier than before. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. He knelt beside the capsule. The hatch was still open, but the wooden wedge he'd used to keep it that way was missing. Something inside glimmered faintly in the dark. Michael reached into his pocket and felt the metal tag again, the edges biting into his skin. He looked toward the empty road. No sound but the wind. For the first time since this began, Michael realized he might be standing on someone else's secret. And secrets like this didn't stay buried. They buried you. The desert had always been quiet, but that morning it was the kind of quiet that came before something broke. The wind had stopped. Even the insects had gone still. Michael stepped out of his truck and felt the air press against him, heavy and waiting. The capsule stood ahead like a white scar against the sand alone, gleaming faintly in the dawn light. The yellow police tape was gone, the tracks of the government vehicles half erased by the night wind. He walked slowly toward it, the crunch of his boots the only sound. The hatch hung open, a dark wound in its side. Inside, the air shimmered faintly with heat. Someone had been there. Recently. He circled around the object, scanning the ground. The sand told stories for anyone who knew how to read it, and now it told too many. Footprints, tire marks, the drag of something heavy. The wedge of wood he'd used to prop the hatch open was lying 10 feet away, snapped in half. Michael crouched and brushed his hand against the metal. It was warm again. Warmer than it should have been at sunrise. A faint hum vibrated beneath his fingers, low and mechanical, like a heartbeat buried deep inside the shell. He stepped back, heart pounding. What the hell did they turn on? A sound broke the silence, the crunch of gravel behind him. Michael spun around. A figure was walking toward him through the dust, jacket flapping in the wind that had suddenly come back. It was Sam. He looked pale, exhausted, but alive. "Sam," Michael said, stunned. "You shouldn't be out of the hospital." "I had to see it," Sam said, his voice rough. "They're coming back for it." Michael looked past him at the empty road. "Who?" "The same men who moved it here, but they're not alone anymore." Sam limped closer to the capsule, placing one hand on the scorched surface. "This thing, it wasn't just a training capsule. It was part of a classified program, a survival simulation. But they tested more than people, they tested systems, pressure, isolation, long-duration conditions. Someone realized the data could be used for more than training astronauts. They started building capsules to monitor human endurance under extreme conditions for military use." Michael frowned. "You're saying this was human experimentation?" Sam nodded slowly. "And not all the test subjects made it out." Michael's stomach turned. "You were inside that thing for 2 days." "I know," Sam said quietly. "I know what it feels like when it starts running hot. The system was still alive in there, waiting for a trigger. That hum you feel, it's self-reactivating. Someone powered it remotely last night. They want to wipe it before anyone can look inside." Michael stared at him. "So they came to destroy evidence?" "Exactly." A low rumble echoed across the desert engines. Multiple. Dust plumes on the horizon. Black SUVs moving fast. "Go," Sam said sharply. "Get in your truck. You can't be here when they arrive." "I'm not leaving you." Sam turned to him, eyes sharp and desperate. "If they find you, They'll take you too. You think they'll let the guy who opened it walk free? You're a witness now." Michael shook his head. "No, I'm done running from this. They can't erase it if someone's watching." He pulled out his phone, started recording video. The capsule, the tracks, the approaching convoy, all of it. The vehicles were close enough now that he could see sunlight flashing off their windshields. Sam grabbed his arm. "You don't understand, Michael. They'll take the footage, the phone, everything." "Then we stream it," Michael said, tapping the screen. "Live feed. Once it's online, they can't erase it." The first SUV skidded to a stop at the edge of the property, kicking sand into the air. Men in tactical gear poured out, weapons slung, earpieces glinting. One of them barked an order. Michael's phone buzzed in his hand, a message from Detective Ruiz. "Stay away from the site. They're cleaning up. Don't go near it." Too late. "Get back," a voice shouted through a megaphone. "Step away from the object. This is a restricted area." Michael raised his phone higher, focusing the camera on the men. "Restricted by who?" he yelled. "This is my land." A man in a black windbreaker stepped forward, the same one who had approached him at the hospital. His voice was calm, controlled. "Mr. Harper, you've interfered in an active federal operation. I'm asking you to stand down and surrender that recording." Michael laughed bitterly. "You mean the evidence? Not happening?" The man's expression didn't change. "You're making a mistake." The humming inside the capsule grew louder, turning into a steady vibration that rattled the sand under their feet. Sam's face went pale. "They've triggered the failsafe." "What failsafe?" "It's going to overload. They'll claim it was an accident." Michael's mind raced. The heat coming from the capsule was rising fast, shimmering the air. He turned to Sam. "We have to move!" They ran toward the truck. Behind them, the man in the windbreaker shouted orders. The SUVs backed up, men diving for cover. The hum rose to a roar, a deep, metallic scream. Then the world exploded in light. A blast of hot air threw Michael to the ground. He covered his head as debris rained around him, sand, shards of metal, the hiss of something melting. When the sound finally faded, he lifted his head. The capsule was gone. Nothing but a crater, smoking and black. Sam lay a few feet away, groaning but alive. Michael crawled to him, coughing. Around them, the men in black shouted into radios, but Michael couldn't hear the words. His ears rang, his vision blurred. Ruiz's SUV came skidding into the scene moments later. She jumped out, waving her badge. "What the hell did you do?" she shouted at the men in black. "This site is under federal jurisdiction," the windbreaker man snapped. "You're trespassing, detective." Ruiz stepped forward, pointing at the crater. "You just destroyed a crime scene." Michael stood unsteadily, raising his phone. The live stream was still running. The blast, the men, the crater. It was all recorded. The man in black saw the red recording light and froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Ruiz turned toward Michael. "Is that live?" "Yeah," he said hoarsely. "Thousands are watching." The man's calm cracked for the first time. "Shut it down." Ruiz smiled, sharp and cold. Too late. Sirens grew louder in the distance. Local police, news crews, maybe even the National Guard. The horizon shimmered with flashing lights. The men in black backed away, their radios hissing. Michael looked down at Sam, who was breathing shallow but smiling weakly. "You did it," Sam whispered. "You made sure they couldn't bury it." Michael helped him to his feet. Together, they walked toward Ruiz as helicopters thudded overhead. Cameras followed them now, not just his phone, but every outlet that had picked up the feed. The desert, the explosion, the cover-up. None of it could be hidden anymore. Ruiz placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. You just lit up half the country, Harper. Hope you're ready for what comes next. He stared at the smoking crater where the capsule had been. After what I've seen, he said quietly, nothing scares me anymore. As dawn spread across the desert, the crater glowed faintly in the rising light, like the wound of a secret finally torn open. The desert had given up its silence, and this time, the whole world was listening. The truth buried in the desert could have stayed hidden forever if one man hadn't opened that hatch. What would you have done in his place? Tell us in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe so you never miss the next mystery.